Well, good afternoon, guys. Another week, another video, right? I'm so glad to be able to even do this with you guys, and I really hope that you've not just enjoyed this, but you really have truly benefited from our time. Even though we are apart physically, at least through this technology, we can connect in some way, shape, or form. I've been excited to see some of you that didn't even know we're on Instagram, showing up for our live sessions. I'm excited to see how these lunches go in the weeks to come, but I've been very excited just to see the participation we've had on our Tuesday night time with Emily and Brandy. Just a thought to throw out there. Leave a comment or just contact me in some way. Would you guys want to do some kind of Zoom meetup or just have some other kind of live experience just so that we can connect more? Just want to get your thoughts on that. But with that all being said and our welcome kind of done, I just want to get into our devotion for this week. And I do want to make this one just a little bit shorter since you guys were diligent enough to go through one that was a little longer last week. Well, what we're going to start today with our little shorter devotion is the book of Colossians, which we were actually going to do on Wednesday nights anyway. And now I just want to give you guys the opportunity to still be able to enjoy this book. This book is a letter of Paul, and it is written around the same time as Philippians while he's in jail. Shocker for Paul to be in jail. And while Paul is in this prison cell, or this house arrest, he gets word about this Colossian church. Now, something to know, a couple things that are really important to know about Colossae, which is where the Colossians live, is it's not really that important of a city. It used to be, but competition in trade and along those lines have really just made it not unimportant, but not really like a bustling metropolis. Not somewhere that's anything like Philippians or Philippi. So Paul is writing this letter, and have that layer, and then there's an extra layer that's kind of remarkable and interesting at the same time. He's probably never been there. In fact, it's very, very likely that Paul has never been to Colossae. But he gets word from one of the church leaders, and what he hears is kind of concerning, enough that he's going to write a letter to him. And what he hears is of this heresy, or this false teaching, that has begun to creep its way into the church. Something that was a problem for the first century Christians as much as it is for us today. Lies like to slip in the back door. And the heresy that they are dealing with and don't even know is this idea of some sort of secret knowledge and some sort of legalistic self-righteousness. In other words, it's never really clearly defined in the letter, because Paul spends so much more time outlining on what's so important about the gospel and on who Jesus is. But at the same time, we can kind of get some hints here. There's definitely secret knowledge involved, and there's definitely this idea of earning salvation in some sense of the word. But why is this all so important? Well, listen to these words that Paul writes in chapter 1. I'm beginning in verse 21, and I'm reading from the English Standard Version. Here's what Paul has to say. And you being the Colossians, who were once alienated, strangers, and hostile enemies in mind, doing evil deeds, he, Jesus, has now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death, in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him. If indeed you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you heard, which is being proclaimed in all creation under heaven, and of which I, Paul, became a minister. So what Paul is trying to drive at in the beginning of his letter is something that he's going to carry through the whole of this letter. This idea of perseverance. They need to persevere in the faith that they have. And another way to say it was true both for the Colossians and remains true for us, is that saving faith in Jesus requires that we continue in what we first believed about Jesus. Now, let me just go ahead and push the misconceptions aside, that does not mean that you can lose your salvation. What that means is simply, if you have saving faith, if you have actually trusted Jesus to save you from your sin, then you're going to continue in the faith that you have. It's not even a question mark. But Paul is warning these Colossians, and the reason that he is warning them is because some of them are turning away from the faith in one degree or another for a gospel that is no gospel at all. What he wants them to really understand is that perseverance is the hallmark of being a faithful follower of Jesus. You can't give up. You can't back down. This call to follow Jesus is a lifelong commitment. And I know we've heard when we talk about salvation this idea of decisions. I made a decision for Jesus. And I understand why people say that. But I think commitment is a much better word. Because when you begin relationships, when you have a completely different you become completely different and have a change in the way that you live your life. That may involve a decision, but at the end of the day, it's really a commitment. A commitment that is more than just an obligation, but really and truly is something that you're going to see through to the end. We find ourselves in a time in our lives where, guys, I'm pretty sure if it hasn't hit you like it's hit me this week, this separation from you, separation from the rest of the church, and really only being able to see a very, very limited number of people. This is a tough time. I'm not going to sugarcoat that for you guys and make it seem like something it isn't. And I know we've talked about the opportunities that this time is giving us, and I think that still is true. But I think what we need to keep in mind is this is a season where we need to pursue perseverance. We have a saving faith in Jesus Christ. And that saving faith can bring us through any season of life, no matter how difficult it is. And what we need to remember and understand is that as we go through difficult seasons, when we go through seasons where we don't have all the answers, that's okay. We don't have to have all the answers. God is not asking us to know everything. He's got that taken care of. He is simply asking us to keep our eyes fixed on Him, to look at every situation, good or bad, and say, Father, I may or may not understand, but what I do know is this: I trust you and you're worth trusting. So guys, this week, as you face more online school, as you face time with your family that may be becoming more about just trying to keep each other alive and not beat each other's throats, just remember this: Jesus is calling us to persevere in the faith that we have in Him. And in case we're wondering why that would be the case, I love what Paul says in the verses preceding verse 21. If you pick up again in chapter 1 in verse 15, he says, Paul writing, he's talking about Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by Him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through Him and for Him. He is before all things, and in Him all things hold together. And He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead. That is, everything that in Him, everything He might be preeminent. For in Him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through Him to reconcile to Himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of His cross. We have so much hope in the cross, because the moment of the greatest suffering in history was also the moment of greatest hope. Guys, we can persevere because Jesus is our hope. He is our salvation, and He can get us through anything because He has already faced the worst. Guys, I love you. I can't wait to see you in some of these live sessions. And hey, throw me some ideas of how we can connect more, maybe just spend some time and hang out. I will see you guys later this week either way.